And welcome, folks. A bit later than planned. Couple of technical hitches on with the camera. I mean, you would have just then had you lovely three faces, and then me just as a blank screen. But hey, it's lovely to see everybody this evening. This month we have Mark, Dan, and myself are joined by Graham Goulden, who is, well, I don't know, Graham. I'm going to just throw it to you. I'm going to throw the floor to you. What is active bystander? What is it all about? How did you get into this work?
Well, let's go right back to the beginning, I suppose. You know, I spent 30 years in policing in Scotland, so I live just near Dan, actually. We've just learned that he's in the Scottish borders. I live in the Scottish borders as well, about 50, 60 miles apart, roughly, I think. So I spent 30 years in policing. In the last 8-9 years of my policing career, I was a chief inspector with our violence reduction unit. And it was in those last years that I became really curious about the presence of third parties, you know, friends, strangers, classmates, teammates. And we know from so much research that we see things. We, the public, we witness the before, the during, and the after. And it really got me thinking then, you know, imagine a Scotland where we trained people to notice stuff and to act. And particularly with a focus on men, and maybe we'll talk about that tonight as well. So active bystandership, what I've taken my work from the violence reduction unit, and I now work with policing, fire and rescue, local authorities, sports teams, helping people develop that workplace culture using the science of bystandership, which in effect is basically reducing harm. It's the art and science of reducing harm from poor behaviours, but also harm from mistakes. Human beings make mistakes, and also people witness mistakes, and also harm from well-being, poor well-being. And poor well-being is a factor in mistakes, as we know, but it's also a contributing factor in poor behaviour. It never excuses a behaviour, a bad behaviour, but it's definitely a factor. So it's about using the science to really help workplace cultures deal with things quickly before it becomes that big issue. You know, look at my old profession, policing. You know, how many times have we seen headlines? A headline today of a Met officer who is being charged with some horrific offences. It's not been convicted yet, but there's been so many stories, and lots of these events, in my view, and you read the article, they could have been prevented with the earlier action. So for me, this is about helping people to act before it becomes reportable to our HR department, or it sort of manifests into something more serious. So it's about acting early, and I think people want to act early.
I think one of the conversations that Mark, Dan, and myself had last month, Graham, is that, you know, actually, how do we, you know, there's so many barriers that stop us from actually kind of being, you know, active bystanders. And one of the things that I know that through the conversations both Mark and Dan had with their respective partners all around, you know, what made them feel safe. And I mean, just that whole thing is like, there are so many barriers. I mean, guys, you're the ones who have the conversations with your partners about this whole thing about, you know, women's safety and what can we do, and the barriers that kind of stop you intervening, as it were. Because I think for me, it's so important that we start earlier in the chain. I don't know what your thoughts are, Mark, Dan.
Yeah, I suppose for us, and I know Graham's mission is to try and change that culture that's around us. Like, it really is such a deep cultural way of being. But it's not even just in how we act, it's in our language. It's the kind of way we speak about things. It's very acceptable and accepting in our language. Like, I saw an Instagram thing the other day about a men's WhatsApp group, and saying that, you know, if this men's WhatsApp group was leaked, you know, we'd all be in real trouble, you know. And like, while it was humor, there's a part of that that's not a good truth. There's a part of that that is really suggesting that in that space, because there's women in that space, we can talk about women in a way that's not acceptable or not respectable. Yeah. And so if we're raising the question here of, so how do we speak up? Like, it's a very difficult thing to say in a WhatsApp group that's not appropriate. it's a very difficult thing to say in a group of people that you know well. That's not appropriate. Now, I know in a smaller group you can in public, it's easier to say, right? But if we don't say it, then what are we allowing if we don't say it? If we don't speak up, then what is the result in the long term of us not speaking up in those spaces? So I think, and that's something I was only thinking about yesterday and thinking about, and sometimes I'll see a message come through in a group, but I'm going, you know, I've enough of this, like, you know, that's not right in these spaces. But do I act all the time? No, because my action, I've probably from fear on my part, because the action will bring too much on me as opposed to being the right thing to do and to say.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Dan, you go for it.
No, so I was just going to say, I mean, that brought something up for me where I used to be in a WhatsApp group with some people I used to play football with, and they started sharing racist jokes and racist material that I found abhorrent. I didn't say anything, I just left the group. And wonder, because I thought, can I actually, if I say here, look, this isn't on, you know, I'm not going to stay in a group where you're sharing this stuff. This just isn't right. What could I achieve? That's what I felt. So I felt, well, I'll leave, and that kind of gives a message anyway. But when I look back, maybe I should have said, no, this is a barrier for me, guys. This isn't on. I thought you were better people than this. This is not right. Because that's what it's about at the end of the day. It's about shared morals and ethics where we all agree this doesn't fly. And, you know, perhaps 20 years ago, it did amongst certain people. And I was watching Gavin and Stacey recently with my dad. I'm here at the Cleveland Clinic in London. My dad's ill at the moment. So I've been entertaining him with various old comedies. And you start to... I watched Gavin and Stacey, and there's a bit in it where they go on Gavin's stag do. And it's all raucous and laddie and all this. And they start talking about women in a way that just made my skin creep. And this is a BBC One program, and this isn't too long ago.
Yeah.
And it was referring to women as that and it. And I just thought, oh my God. And then I must admit, I thought to myself then, if I was in a group of guys like that now on the stag do, lads, would I now feel comfortable and confident enough to go, fellas, this doesn't fly. I'm not having that. I'm not having you talk about fellow human beings in that way. Now, I'd like to think I would feel that way.
Yeah. I think Dan, and I see Debbie has put something in the chat about calling it out. And yeah, that's what we need to get to, I suppose. But, you know, we guys, we're conditioned from a young age, right? You know, the unwritten rules of growing up, I think the rules start with parents. You know, it's not your business, stay out of it. Teachers reinforce that as well. And then as we go into, and there's no excuse, I'm not excusing behaviour here, trying to understand it. But when we go into the sort of late teens, early 20s, loyalty is a big thing in our peer groups, guys, isn't it? You know, being loyal to your mates is a real big thing. And if you are going against or being seen to be going against your friends, then there's the social repercussions. It's not a physical repercussion. I don't think we fear physical violence from our friends, but we fear isolation. And so how we overcome that is, one, redefine loyalty. What does it mean to be a good mate? That's so important, you know, and I use that friends don't let friends drive drunk analogy that came from the US. I use that in a lot of my work. Friends don't let friends lose their jobs. Friends don't let friends, you know, use sexist language and get arrested or whatever. But another thing we need to do with men is get them talking to each other, because I can get, you know, in these WhatsApp groups, the vast majority of men will be uncomfortable with these comments. We know from all the research that men often wrongly perceive what their friends think. You know, we often think, some men think that their friends support sexist views or misogynistic views, but when they don't. So how we overcome that is by and I think in science it's called pluralistic ignorance, where we think our views are different from the rest, and the reality is they're probably more often than not exactly the same. So what we need to do, and what I do in my work, is I bring people together. You know, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how we feel, because men are uncomfortable. Men will respect men for speaking up, which suggests you'll be respected for speaking up as well. But if we don't have these conversations, then men are going to take the safe option, which is do nothing, because they're just scared. There's that social fear. And what we need to do is encourage and normalize these conversations. So if I have a chat with my friend, I'm not calling them out. as a lot of people often think about. I'm calling them in because I'm a mate. Dan, you're my friend. I need to tell you this because you could find yourself, losing your job if you're in a workplace situation. So, it sounds easy to call it out. I totally accept that. But us guys, we're trying to unpick 8,000, 9,000 years of patriarchy, right? And Debbie, yeah. And there's another thing as well. Until you have a daughter, and I'll be honest with you, what got me on the page for this work was something happened to my daughter, right? Something happened to my dad. My dad was a victim of suicide back in 2008. And then before these days, I never thought about these issues as a man. And all the science says, again, the science, it's not my viewpoint, science says that empathy is a big motivator. And you know what? If it gets men and boys on the page talking about this stuff, great. Because if it wasn't for my daughter's experience, I probably wouldn't be here tonight speaking to you. Because a lot of the privilege that I have as a guy would be invisible. So we have to move from just the simple expectation, Debbie, that I get what you're saying, but let's not push men down if their entry level into this work is seeing it through the lens of their daughter, their wife, because that's a good thing. At least they're there for you to talk to then, because if they're not there, then you can't speak to them.
I think that's so powerful though, Graham. And it was your conversation, Mark, about the conversation you had with your wife being in a house full of women, about what was safety for her, and that one of the things that she shared that was how running at 6 o'clock in the morning, yes, there were cars around, but she still didn't feel safe, and that wouldn't have necessarily have come into your sort of, I suppose, your understanding. But I think it's why these kinds of conversations are so important, to be able to build this understanding, because we don't know what we don't know, right? And I think we have to go from a position of, effectively, the level, you've got to meet them where there's a classic, coaching phrase, you've got to meet them where they're at. Yeah. And everybody is going to be at a different level. And so you've got to start there and bring them in the conversation, which is why, I kind of, Mark, Dan, myself have kind of been doing regular lives, way before I started this initiative, the Together as Allies. And because part of that is around shared understanding. And, I don't have, I have nieces, I don't have any kids of my own, but I can bring together voices to bring about understanding. But people still, feel apprehensive, I think. Where do these spaces exist? I mean, where we can drive this understanding?
I think for me, it's about just working better to create spaces. A lot of organizations, let's focus on workplaces. So a lot of organizations just now rely on e-learning training, to talk about some of this stuff. And I get it, because sometimes it's the cheaper option and you can spread loads of people to get a message out. But again, the science, and I everything I do and say is backed up by science, because there's no point in me just being preachy and whatnot. It's backed up by evidence. All the science says that you need to get people together. You need to redefine loyalty. You need to address pluralistic ignorance in society, get people talking. Because if we don't, as human beings, we're scared. We're scared of putting our head above the parapet. Look at lots of big cases just now in the world. Look at the Harrods case, look at the church, look at the army with the Jalsi Beck case recently. Look at what's happening in the White House with Trump and his loyal followers as well. People are scared to actually raise the head above the parapet. And just now in the UK, we need people to speak up. We saw it last year with the riots in England. We saw, on the streets, we saw people rioting, but then we saw the helpers, the people coming out, sort of sweeping the streets, repairing the mosques. And then that Wednesday night last year, we thought it was all going to go horribly wrong. Thousands of people came out just to send the message out. And I think what exists in society is a false consensus where the majority of us think we're in the minority, and there's a minority of people who just add fuel to the fire. And Dan, you're smiling. You get this. And if we don't have the majority speaking up, then it's like in the US just now. We need leaders to galvanize the opposition to what's happening, because it's almost like the Democrats are going on holiday for 4 years. That's what it feels like to me and my American friends. So we need to create these spaces. We need to meet men where they're at. It's a great phrase you use, Laura. I use that a lot in my work. Meet people where they're at. Don't go in all guns blazing. Because you go in all guns blazing, calling people out, you create a stress reaction in them, and they're going to react to you. You need to accept that some people will not think as you think, and some people may change if you have the right approach. Or how you speak to people is really important. That's why I use the phrase calling in, or I think in social work, the phrase connect before correct. Just remind people of your friendship, your relationship, and then you can have a conversation with them. If we just keep this shouting approach, and I get the frustration, and I can see it in Debbie there as well. The frustration is there, but we need to think differently about how we address these issues and how we activate. Because for me, the active bystander is the untapped resource. If we can activate people in our communities, they will do wonderful things. And that's about motivating them, equipping them, and helping them feel supported. Let them see that in the main, they're surrounded by people who support their views.
So important. I mean, the impact of the work that we're doing here in Tunbridge Wells district, and that is bringing together sort of, I suppose, arguably private sector meets public sector meets the community, in order to be able to bring these voices together. And this is very much a very big part of this, because we need to be having more conversations. We need to get that momentum going. In the spaces that you guys occupy, Mark, Dan, how do you see it sort of paying out in terms of getting that bigger understanding?
Yeah, well, so I run a men's WhatsApp group, Laura, and in my group, there's nothing is off in terms of discussion. And the one thing we always realise when we all start opening up and sharing is we all go through the same things. We all have much more in common than we have that divides us or separates us. The guys regularly say that, oh my God, I thought it was just me.
Yeah.
So, as you know, Graham's nailed it. We've got to have more conversations, more things like this, more public conversations rather than just it, where they go, oh, it's not just me. It's not just me sitting there going, this shouldn't happen. We shouldn't be talking in this way. We shouldn't be behaving in this way. Because that's the trouble. If we feel like the minority, as Graham's touched on there and the science backs up, we don't want to feel like outcasts. We were brought up in a world where you don't grasp and you don't go against the grain. What we've got to realise is this is not going against the grain. This is the grain. But unless we're having regular conversations, unless we've got spaces like my WhatsApp group where there's no judgment, where people can reveal how they really feel, and then we go, oh my God, yeah, we all feel like that. And we need leaders, because something else I've realised in the spaces I'm in is people are just waiting around to be led. And
yeah. Very true, Dan.
All thinking the same things. We all want the same thing. We all want peace. We all want harmony. We want a world where our daughters can leave the door and feel safe. We all want that. There's nobody out there going, no, I prefer a world where my wife has to worry every time she goes out jogging. Nobody wants that world. But we've got to do something about it. We've got to create it. And conversations like this, and the more talking, the more we can get together, the more we can understand, the better.
I totally agree, Dan.
I find it very interesting, and to Dan's point there as well, like I'm in a group of men only that has leaders, and actually we're trying to train new leaders to expand it out, and it's a lovely space because the men in it are very open about who they are and where they are, and everyone's very much about leading themselves first and then leading from that space, and I think it's really important. But what I find very interesting too, and Graham, you can probably speak a lot to this right now, is like I'm working, so I work as a coach too, Graham, and I've been working with a lot of men across a lot of different age ranges, and I find men of our age of our vintage, let's say, more experienced, we kind of have, as Titans, we kind of have a similar thinking. Like, you know, in the WhatsApp groups with those guys, like, you know, it would be very anti Andrew Tate and Conor McGregor and these kind of guys. But then if I'm working with a guy and he's under 30, these guys are heroes to him. You know, and I'm at pains to go, oh, Jesus, wait a second now, you know, like, but they're like, oh, but look what he's achieved, look what he's done, and all these kind of pieces, you know. And I find it very interesting how that's lauded in such a way to that generation, and so deliberately done too. Like, there's no doubt. Like, I'll use Ireland as an example. We as a country, our Taoiseach, our leader, was invited to the White House on the 14th of March, right? St. Patrick's Day is the 17th of March. It's the big day that the Irish person normally goes to the White House. Instead, Donald Trump had Conor McGregor at the White House that day. Conor McGregor is hated in Ireland by any person, every woman and any man over the age of 30, because the man is a convicted rapist. Like, the man's a terrible human being, but he's successful. Yet that's the message, is that he represents us as a nation. And then people see him and see the stuff that he says, which is, again, playing into the racial playbook, and worship him for it. And so I think, so the big question, Graham, and maybe I'd like to throw to yourself on that point, is how do we get in touch? Because us as men, we're maturing into ourselves and beginning to understand the word. I'm a man of 2 daughters. I understand this word and so much more. How do we get in touch with those guys who are 30 and under, who haven't been exposed to women in the same way that we have at our age?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm gonna flip it a little bit, because actually, you know, last year the Guardian ran a headline, and the headline was something like, you know, 1 in 5 young men in the UK support Andrew Tate, and that was the big headline. But there's another headline there, isn't there? 4 in 5 don't. Actually, Mark, most young men don't support Andrew Tate. You know, that's it. That's the evidence. The surveys suggest that most, and we do hear the stories, but let's face it, bad news sells the story. Bad news sells the books. Bad news sells the research. And we need to have a more positive conversation. We need to bring this majority that Dan talks about and reassure them that in the main, they do think the same. They do think Andrew Tate's views on misogyny and whatnot are totally disgusting, right? And I have these conversations all the time with men of all ages, young police officers, older police officers, young dads, and the evidence, you know, is backed up. Most men don't support Andrew Tate. But let's go back to what you said about Conor McGregor, and all Trump is doing is it's a game of chess just now with him. He is playing to his white male base in America. It's all he's doing. You know, the movement of Andrew Tate from the States, from Romania to the States, was a chess piece move. It's all it was to shore up his male vote from certain parts of the US. That's it. And so there's a big game being played, and it's like we see it in this country as well, with Nigel Farage talking about supporting Andrew Tate and his great views and whatnot. Again, just to back up it's the playbook. It's the sort of right playbook in many ways to galvanize some support. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the actual true values and feelings that young men have, and we owe it to them to create these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a really good point. You know, it's the 4 out of 5 that don't kind of engage with, you know, Andrew Tate as being, you know, the role model of the future. And I guess it's exploring and expanding those opportunities and those spaces to have more conversations that are more publicly held. And I guess that's one of the things that, you know, I very firmly believe in, is that we can't hide away in private groups all the time, because we just don't shift the narrative. Yes, we can get, you know, confidence and feel more safe to share some of our thoughts in those groups, but it does take people to actually make that next step, to actually step outside of those safe spaces to do stuff. And so I guess it's back to that whole, you know, finding those leaders, you know, who are making step changes to talking more openly, you know, and, you know, there's 4 of us in this room having this conversation now. So, you know, there's 4 leaders. But I guess it's how can we speed up that momentum?
Yeah. You know, one thing, you know, the debate just now in the UK is Adolescence, the drama that's been on Netflix. And there's been a lot of talk about the need for more male role models and leaders. And I get that. Yeah, but what we need to be doing is actually giving young men the skills for them to be their own leaders and role models, right? We need to give them the skills to be courageous, show moral courage, to be compassionate, to show empathy, to have a vision, to all the traits of good, effective leaders. We need to instill them in young boys and young men. Because this whole idea of taking that drama into schools to show young people horrifies me, actually, because it goes against the evidence. It just goes against the evidence of what works. That's for parents. That drama is for parents and adults, for us to reflect, and it's built empathy. And I think one thing we need to do with, empathy is a big motivator. We saw it after the post office drama. We'll see it with adolescents. We'll see it with the Disney drama on the guy who was shot by the police many years ago on the subway. We'll see empathy being built, and we need to, I keep saying we require to go into these young men, these male groups, and young people, I suppose, especially, and start to instill character, values, beliefs, start to give them their presence on the world, because your presence is your superpower, and it's your brand in many ways. The brand that will live with you for the rest of your life and will lead to you making good decisions, lead to helping people out in the future. So it's about the All Blacks call it, better people make better All Blacks. Better people make better All Blacks. So working with young people, young boys in particular, that's our theme tonight, is just developing character. Character matters early on. Helping them to be courageous, helping them to have the moral courage to tell their mates, that's wrong, mate. Don't do that. If a friend discloses abuse, hey, that's wrong and not your fault. Thanks for telling me. We need to give them these are the skills of good leaders. And it isn't about being in charge. It's about giving people the skills to be good, effective leaders in their communities, in their peer groups, in their relationships. Yeah, that's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, I love that. And when we talk about, self-leadership, and you've said it as well, Mark, we have to be leaders of ourselves first before we can lead others. And it starts with that education that kids are getting, and I think it's so important. Dan,
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, it comes back to so many of the things we always talk about, the three of us. Trusting, respecting yourself. That's where it starts, doesn't it? If you don't trust and respect and love yourself, you don't trust and respect and love other people, and people don't trust, love, and respect you. So it starts with knowing who you are, and knowing that we've all got inbuilt ethics. We have a guidance system that if only we will shut out the noise and listen to it, that tells us what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And it's, Graham's nailed it there. We've got to empower young people to trust themselves, because again, the 4 in 5, they're a silent majority. We've got to empower them to not be silent, to trust how they feel when they look at this stuff and they're disgusted by it and they go, this is wrong. We need to empower them to be able to say, this is wrong. So the other 3 of the 4 all go, this is wrong, and then they go, hang on, there's 4 of us and 1 of them, we're right. So we can be confident. We can nail our colours to the mast. We can say we don't agree with this. We can say we've listened to our hearts, and our hearts tell us we want to be together. We want to create safe environments. We want to do good things to improve our environment and our planet and our culture and people. And we're crying out for that, aren't we, in our culture at the moment, for the silent majority to stand up as one and say, we're not having this anymore. We don't want to live in this world.
Yeah. I think, Laura, one thing for me, a lot of people who do the similar work to me, bystander type training, they simply just think giving people the tools to act is enough. That's one motivator. Knowing what to do is one motivator. The biggest motivator for bystanders is a sense of responsibility. And that's got 2 sources. One's internal. So Dan, you're spot on. That's you. That's your moral compass. That's your upbringing. That's your sense of right and wrong. That's just you as a human being. But the other sense of responsibility comes from being given. So helping young men. When I work with policing, I talk about giving permission. If I make a mistake, if I say something that is wrong, I want you to tell me. I want you to to point out my mistake. I want you to point out something that's upset you. Because when we do that, science, again, says people will act. So we need to motivate people. You know, I'm loving the empathy that the drama's building, because we're seeing more action. That's why we're seeing people being more aware now, because empathy's being built. Other big motivators are stopping harm. So again, helping people intervene early stops the car crash from happening. You know, a friend losing their job, a friend going to jail. It's like just now the One Punch campaign in the UK. You hear that, you know, the idea you punch someone once, you could kill them. And for me, that is focusing on the wrong people. That campaign focuses solely on the person who's about to use the punch. I get the reason why, but 9 times out of 10, that person's not regulated. Their brain is stressed, their brain's alcoholed up, drugged up, or whatever, but their mates might not be. Friends don't let friends go to jail. Friends don't let friends kill people. It's using that type of message, instilling that responsibility on people and giving them the tools to be able to do that. So we need to motivate people. And just now, a lot of bystander type trainings, they fail to really motivate people. They give them the tools and think that's it. Way more than that. And, you know, it's so important that we help people overcome the challenges, we motivate them, and we give them the tools. Because when you motivate people to act and you equip them, the science says they will intervene, they will act, and they'll do it. They'll do it early.
No, you hit on a really important point there, that this one about the sort of shared responsibility and the motivators that get people actually signing up to these things. Because, you know, it is absolutely, as you say, Dan, it is about mobilizing the four so that more people can see, you know, what's happening. So that narrative changes. I don't know, Mark, have you got any further thoughts to show deep in thought there?
There's so much to this, like, and you know, I'm really thinking about Graham was talking there. Like, I love how your language, Graham, is inclusive. You know, I love how your language is flipping things, like the count, you know, instead of calling someone out, calling someone in. I think that's such a powerful reframe of what we need to do, because we do live in a world that is deliberately, like our online world, you know, clicks are generated by division as opposed to by agreement. So we're naturally trained into, not trained, but as in conditioned into thinking that way, that it's you're that, I'm this, therefore we can't agree, as opposed to, well, let's see where we can meet. I think that's a really powerful way to think and look at it. You know, and I suppose what I was thinking about, Laura, is how do I, so whenever we have these kind of conversations, I think, well, how do I bring this conversation to my dinner table? You know, how do I bring it to the dinner table in a way that I'm not just telling, I'm trying to find out what I can be taught, or what I can learn, or what I can understand better, and what I can know a little bit better. Because that's what I have to do. I have to be educated as much as possible. I have to be open to that education, you know. I have to be open to being challenged in these spaces. My wife has challenged me an awful lot in the past year on, you said the word safety there. What does safety really mean? And she even went to the point of, like, you know, safety is me being at home and you not having to rope me, you know. Like, just because you're a husband does not give you a right to do something like that, because that's still my boundaries and my bodies, you know. And I had to think about that and think, oh, well, yeah, but you know, like, you know, and how I'm conditioned to think, no, you know what, she's absolutely right. Like, you know, she's 100% right. I don't have that right to do that. And like, to think about, you know, I have a very good relationship with my wife. And she says that I'm a good man. I'd like to think I try to be as best as I can. Yet I take that liberty and I take that privilege because I believe I'm entitled to it. So if I'm willing to do that in the home and I would consider myself a good man, well, then how does that play into society, you know? So I think for me, it was really coming out what Graham's saying there, is that idea of how do we bring people along, but how do I also be open to be challenged in the right way? So that instead of feeling defensive about it, I can say, okay, well then clearly I need to change. What's my behavior that's not right here?
And that's another benefit of the bystander approach. You know, bystander approach is not simply training people to intervene. You know, traditional approaches to violence look at perpetrators or victims. And traditionally, men are the problem or the potential problem, and women are the victims or potential victims. And what if we take that approach, then we run the risk of pushback from men and victim blaming for women and girls. And that's not a great way to do it. But when you place people into the role as the bystander, you force self-inspection. You force people to self-inspect their own viewpoints, their own attitudes, And we know from the research that some people do just change because they've maybe not been challenged. They've maybe not, no one's ever said that to me before that that joke is wrong or that behavior is wrong. So the bystander approach, when I use it, I'm engaging people, because to educate, you need to be engaged, don't you? You need to be ready to be, in that learning zone. You need to be ready for it. So the bystander approach, and I quite often when I do my trainings, people will say to me, hey, thanks for that, Graham. You made me think about my jokey personality and how I might be upsetting people. So people will just change like that. They'll just change like that. And again, science says that cultures like policing, fire, big organizations where we see poor behavior, they need to create cultures where the harm doers, the people who cause harm, are kept in check. So these trainings start to do that. And then the culture starts to keep them in check as well. So a more positive approach is way better. And again, it follows the social science, social norms, way better to focus on the positives rather than just the negatives.
I love that. I think it is that whole thing. We just have, almost for me, we just have to start having conversations where we seek to understand rather than seek to tell. And the more honest and open in safe spaces that we can learn, the different stories from the different individuals, then actually the more that we will understand. I mean, I have a feeling we could probably carry on talking for probably at least another half an hour on all of this. But I know, what's one final comment that you guys all want to share before we sign off for the evening?
So I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, and I think what Graham and Mark have both touched on there. Go look in the mirror, guys. Go look in the mirror. What are you doing? How do you feel about it? Who are you talking to about this stuff? Are you challenging yourself? Are you challenging your thoughts and your behaviours? Are you keeping yourself in check first and foremost? Are you setting a good example to your children? That's where it starts. It starts by looking in the mirror and holding yourself to account. Then, once you can, we talked about this earlier, and we say this a lot. Once you can then start to lead yourself, then you can begin to lead others. Then you can begin to lead conversations. Then you can start conversations. You can create safe spaces for the 4 out of the 5 to have these chats and to go, wow, we agree, we're together. This is powerful. Let's do something.
Oh, I love that, Darren. Mark, any?
Yeah, what I'm really enthused by is Graham's point about 4 out of 5 don't support the likes of Andrew Tate. And the power is in the majority. It really is. And we focus on the minority that maybe caused the problem. But the best way to eradicate that challenge is for the majority to Dan's word, to not be such a silent majority anymore and to be vocal about it. Which means that, and to your point about people needing leaders, Dan, it's so true. There's a lot of men out there who are looking for vision and a guidance and something like a lightning rod for the right thing. And if you lead in the right way, people will go, do you know what, that's the truth. Like when we meet someone who's been authentically themselves, and we run into someone who has been true to who they really are, and I mean in the right way, I don't mean in some egotistical way, I mean like being open, being vulnerable, being able to deal with what's going on, we gravitate towards that. I want more of that in my life. Or we run from it because it's showing us too much of ourselves. So I think for us, that authenticity piece is so important, and to tap into that 4 out of 5. Like I'm already thinking about, well, how do I tap into that? How do I tap into that generation of people to say, what's going on in this space? I speak to a few people who are working around schools. So that means in a school classroom of 30 boys, you're looking at, 24 of them don't believe this, right? But they probably, yeah, I know I was doing the math, it took a second. They're probably though not speaking up, and they're probably going along with the norm like I would have done. And so if we tap in, and if that conversation happens in that space, then the 6 lads who are the ones driving the wrong direction will have to just actually kind of go, well, maybe this is not what we need to do and where we need to go. So to be honest with you, Laura, I'm left with quite a bit of hope as a dad of daughters, as a man in this world. The actions are there if we tap into the right people at the moment. Yeah.
I think, let's quickly look at the 1 in 5 headline. So the psychology around the problem with the 1 in 5 headline is, I'm a guy sitting in a room with 5 people, 4 other men, there's 5 of us. I'm thinking which one supports them. And if I don't know, I run the risk of joining in. And we see that in WhatsApp groups. We see people joining in with poor behaviors. If we continually focus on the negative, then people are going to take the easy option, which is to join in or just do nothing. And I think the last message from me is, again, just citing some of the science around this. There are people in the world who every single day, male, female, whoever, every single day they will do the right thing. Well, we know that from the science, and what they have is, and the research says that these people have got that inner core that you guys have talked about tonight. They're really in touch with their values, their belief systems. They have grown up in families where rights and wrongs have been discussed, pro-social behaviors have been role modeled. And just to leave you with a message from Ted Lasso, believe, right? These people believe that you can make a difference, right? They act because they know that their actions will actually make a difference. So everybody who's sharing with us tonight, just believe that your presence will make an impact. One person, creates that movement, right? Action, the science says action breeds action. So just have that belief that you actually can make a difference. And hopefully, Laura, we can come together again and do some trainings in the future and bring some people along and just get people thinking about their role in society.
No, Graham, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you join us this evening. And yeah, we will be doing more conversations. But if people want to learn more about Active Bystander, should they connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You'll obviously share my details tonight, Laura. I'm also on on Instagram as well. My website is grahamgoulden.com. I still have a presence on X or Twitter because I just want to be the positive out there. I just think I want to be, still want to be there to fight the Nazis, as they say, on X, because there are still some good people out there who are fighting the cause, and I think we need to, rather than allow that platform to be hijacked by the bad side of the world. I'm quite active in this field. My website's got some blogs, some links to my work. My email address is on there as well. So feel free to reach out. And I just think there's so much potential in our communities to make a difference.
No, that's all right. It's been an absolute pleasure, Graham. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dan. And we'll catch up next month.